Hello, and welcome to a new episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. I am your host, Katerina. Each week, we dive into a blend of topics that resonate with the soul. Whether you're an architect enthusiast, have a passion for wanderlust, want to discover holistic approaches to rejuvenate your body and mind, or are intrigued to learn about Vastu Shastra with a modern approach, you've come to the right place. Join me as I sit down with inspiring, like-minded women from various walks of life. We will delve into their journeys to discuss the challenges and moments that define their paths. So sit back, relax, and let the spark of positive energy ignite your curiosity. Hi, it's me, Katerina. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share with you something that can change the trajectory of your life. If you are ready to start your own architecture firm but are feeling overwhelmed by where to begin, I understand, because I felt the same way when I first embarked on my entrepreneurial journey. This is why I have created the ebook, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. This comprehensive workbook contains everything I wish I had known before starting my own firm. From building a solid business plan to creating your brand, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm offers a step-by-step guide tailored to your timeline, whether you're launching your firm today, next month, or in a few years. Dive into essential topics like financial planning, organization strategies, and how to secure your first client, all in one convenient resource. That's right, you don't have to spend hours researching. I have done that for you so you can focus on building your business. And that's not all. With your purchase, you'll also receive an exclusive meditation for business owners, mindfulness tips, a crystal guide for support, and gratitude exercises to help you stay focused and positive throughout your journey. Turn your dream of having your own firm into a reality with the Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. Click on the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Now, let's dive into the episode. Today, I'm joined by interior designer Erica Reiner. Erica is the owner of Eco Method Interiors, an LA-based firm specializing in eco-friendly interior design. Her method of design also focuses on sourcing cleaner and greener products, including ways to reduce waste and offset the project's carbon footprint. Erica, welcome to From the Honeycomb.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, me too. So as you know, we begin every episode by sharing something that we are grateful for in the present moment. So what are you grateful for?
Oh, I am grateful for the basics every day, my family, my safety, my health. And then sometimes when extra fun things happen, like a good parking spot, I'm always grateful for. The sun outside, stuff like that.
Oh, I love it. It's the little things I think that matter a lot. And that is so true. And I know you live in LA, so parking. I always, if I'm driving through a parking lot, and I see that it's busy, I'm always I do a little prayer to the parking gods. And I'm like, please let me have an easy spot to find. And a lot of the times, I feel like I manifest it. It's interesting.
I know. In our family, he's called Brian. So we go, please, Brian. And yeah, sometimes it works.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's so funny. That's really funny. Well, Erica, can you share with us how you started? What's your journey into interior design? What's brought you to where you are today? And I know you have your own business, but kind of what's the background? What's your journey?
So I started out in the environmental field and environmental education, and I just kind of noticed people around me were starting their own businesses too. And it kind of was just like a light bulb moment for me at some point, because I was like, oh, I'd love to have my own business. But I started with a few ideas, and interior design was just one of them. But I kind of worked on all of them until it whittled down to that. I just always had an interest in it. My mom was always interested in it. I was always redoing my room as a kid. So I started exploring projects that I would find from wherever. This is in 2014 or thereabouts. So there was various online things and trying to connect with people. And I started cobbling together my first experiences. And then in 2018, I just really leaned into the eco side of things because that's where my background was. And I didn't want to have to try and convince people to get better products. So I rebranded then and also started putting aside the other day work and focusing on business more. So that is kind of the origin story.
Nice. And then I know you also had a daughter, was it?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
Nice.
19 months ago now.
19 months ago. Amazing. And how has your business transformed throughout the years? Like, is it just you still working, or have you been able to delegate work or hire people?
Yeah. So the biggest transformation was really like, rebranding from used to be called to Eco Method Interiors and kind of like thinking about what that was going to mean for things. And then actually during COVID time was probably my busiest time.
Wow.
And so I did take on an assistant at that time. It was supposed to be in person, but she ended up being completely virtual and just never moved back to LA due to COVID and, living costs out here versus Illinois.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I worked with her for quite a while. And then when I was ready to step down for maternity leave, I stepped her down and she works for me on a freelance basis as needed. And I also found a virtual assistant company specifically for interior designers that I will farm out and delegate work to as I need to, which has been really handy. So I've taken advantage of that and kind of explored all avenues, various freelancers and artists on Upwork, stuff like that. So I've been all over the map. The big vision was to accumulate a small in house team and then replicate the process, in different branches all over the country. So that's the pie in the sky dream.
Nice. And I know we've talked before about how your company is set up and how, like, the services that you provide for clients, but can you walk us through, because I really liked how you presented your services essentially is you can go from picking the designs, which is great, is helping during construction, coordinating shipping and things like that, which there is just so much that I think clients don't understand when it comes to interior design. It's not just picking the fun materials, at a showroom and putting together color palettes. It's also making sure the materials come in and then where are they sourced. And I know you keep, that eco method of yours in mind, especially getting the materials. So can you kind of walk us through your process through a project?
Yeah. So I do have a set, process, and I'm such a like systems and processes nerd because I would just everything would be falling through the cracks if I didn't pay close attention to that. And just through the years, like the iterations of, the order of things, I feel like where it's at now is the best results for the client and for me. So I do have a process, but the piece that comes into play that's a little bit different than, let's say, just like conventional designers is mostly two phases. So I break down the majority of the work into like a preliminary phase and then like the schematic phase, let's call it. And that's like kind of the two presentations I'm doing with the clients with the deliverables. So in that first preliminary phase, my kind of, let's call it signature like deliverable is just a goal sheet with some helpful, cute icons and a little bit of bullets and text about what I think we're going to achieve on the eco friendly side of things. This breaks down into sustainability goals and non toxic chemical oriented goals, let's call them, depending on the client's needs, desires, etc. So once I've had the consultation with a client and I'm working on that first part of the presentation with the floor plans, etc., I'm also just thinking based on my knowledge base and availability of what I know there to be in the market, what kinds of things am I going to be able to, let's say, swap for more sustainable items or more non-toxic items. And that's where, and basically it is just like a little bit of a guesstimate and a little bit of just goals, which is, transparent in the document of what I think we can do, what I'm trying to do.
Mhm.
And then I go on to the other phases of the project. And then once I am more in depth in the sourcing, I try to follow the goals. If there's more, great. If they're in different areas and the items that I thought we were going to be able to do, great. But it kind of just provides a basic framework of something tangible that's going to be
Mhm.
like, what is the green stuff here? And where is that going to come into play? Because everyone has kind of like different needs with the different
Mhm.
clients. So it helps just break that down. And then in the sourcing, I like to include all of the green information in the description of the items in my quote documentation and things like that that I then present later. So if it has a certification, if it has an attribute about it that is beneficial in some way, I'm really transparent and trying to like promote all of that information, Whereas some designers and even some makers kind of like hide it or tuck it in or don't even tell it to the client. Like if the designer just wants to be more eco-friendly, they'll just kind of like slip it in. For me, I'm like, we are doing this good thing. And I'm like, we are going to talk. I want you to know about it. So I just make sure it's really clear there. And then something new I've been doing this year is following up at the end of the project in the closeout materials with how we did. Basically, it's like a report card. So we had the goals, we did the project, and it's like, how did this shape up? What did we achieve? And we can look at things that were bought that had recycled content in them, things that were FSC certified. It's going to be like various different types of things, but I think it'll be helpful for me too to see like what is eventuating in these projects. So it's just like these little touch points throughout the process. And then when it comes to construction, it's a lot of doing a bunch of research and being able to specify things for the contractor or builder, which is kind of more in your wheelhouse now too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think I liked hearing that you have like check-ins during the project, like during the different phases too, and especially checking in with your goals. Like you have me thinking like that's actually a really good idea. I should definitely incorporate that because the design changes. Like we work in such a creative field and clients' decisions change or they see something inspirational or you find something different and you kind of change it. Or for me, maybe the zoning code changes or I have to do something, with the building code and all that. But that's really nice that you also take time to check in, which I think is really important. And also to see, like you said, check in with the goals. And one of the questions I have for you is how do you find all of these materials and how do you source manufacturers? Like, is there an expo or is this just you in going individually and finding these vendors?
This is the number one question I get asked. And the answer, I wish I had like one or two specific things I could say, but it really is truly everything. I've done everything. I've gone to the expos. I once went to High Point, the biggest designer market, and Sustainable Furnishings Council, works with them, has like a little expo area, and they will mark certain vendors as greener or not. So one time I went around to all of them or ones that I had done research on and was trying to dig into what products, what lines, or what attributes made them a part of this. That was a bit of a fail because oftentimes they just hire temporary staff to help work those showrooms and they are not informed about that. So once in a while, I would get, if it's a smaller company and there happened to be someone there at the time, I was asking who knew, I would get people to be able to speak on the subject, add them to my list. So definitely have done that. A lot of it, as you would imagine these days, is just Google searching. So what I'll do is I'll take certain criteria, words, important attributes, characteristics, and then, pair that up with whatever I'm looking for. So today I'm looking for a navy blue velvet dining chair, but I really wanted to find one that was made from recycled poly. So I'll pair the two, things up because it's kind of just like this soup that comes together once I know what I'm looking for and in the other elements of the sourcing. So sometimes it's just as much as a Google search. Again, that's only as limiting as the manufacturers want to be transparent or not about things. Sometimes you'll do a search if Joe Schmo is searching for something on Wayfair, sometimes you'll be able to do a search for some sustainability criteria, but there's nothing listed in the manufacturer details. So it's very hard to parse out what's true and what's not true. So it's really just been a long time. Some of it is just the nitty gritty of contacting a manufacturer and asking. There's a lot of greenwashing and there's a lot of answers we think we make really good quality products, so you won't need to throw them away for years and years. And that's as far as it goes, which is an important piece, but it is so much bigger than that. So it's a lot of just investigating. And then, speaking with other designers or what's happened now. The most recent iteration of this is, I'm sure a lot of designers and architects get inbound, promotions from trade resources and reps trying to promote the company's product. And so if there is something that looks interesting or is aesthetically pleasing or whatever, I will be like, cool, great. Do you have anything that is sustainable in any way, shape, or form? And then they might get back to me. And if one of the criteria meets one of my criteria, I'll put it in my database. And so sometimes I'll find it like that on the inbound. And especially now if someone is making something green, they will find me, which is great. That's what I want more of. But it is hard. Like, one of the benefits of working with someone like me is that, like, all that research has been going on for years and years and years. So yeah, I just look however I can.
That's amazing. That makes sense to have like a log, and it just sounds like, yeah, it's like the same question, like where do you get clients from? There's multiple ways you can get clients. Same thing as multiple ways of finding materials. And then how do you know if it's good quality? Like, yes, they may tell you, like you said, it's long lasting. Okay, well, great, but how do you know if it ends up being good quality? Is there any like way to, I know that's really hard. I've had clients ask that. I've had,
One is honestly just the level of like trust that a brand has over years and over time,
mhm,
and the relationship that they build with the design community. Like, you over time just see brands that are focused on the design community. They've been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, things like that. And frankly, I do have a bias about certain platforms. And
mhm,
also, price point is a good indicator. It's like buying anything else. Like, you can buy in the car market, this is always my example, you could buy a Ford Pinto, or you could buy a Rolls Royce. And there are different expectations and different levels of quality and longevity associated with the more expensive product. At some point, there is just like, a price tag located because of a brand name, perhaps. But there is a lot to be said about what to expect with the price tag. I think for some reason you would think that that's fairly obvious, but I do think a lot of people are still kind of stuck in the idea or impression or era that like things will cost IKEA level
mm, right.
costs. And there's a place and a time for that level of furniture. I've had plenty of IKEA furniture in my past,
Mhm,
but you have to level your expectations to match that price point.
mhm,
So, for instance, like, I just had an end user. So, I was working with a commercial multifamily real estate investment client. They're the client, the investor. They have a budget. It's tight. So, I'm like, yeah, I can do it. But we're getting a lot of stuff from off the shelf, pre made, lower
mm.
quality things. And then the end user gets back to them, which gets back to me. And it's like, hey, these legs keep breaking off these chairs. We're trying to reattach them. Like, what do we do? And I kind of want to be like, sorry,
Yeah.
that's what your budget was. So I just advocate and like try and find, trying to resolve it with the manufacturer, etc. But price point is a big indicator. So it's that perpetual, human desire to save money now, not spend now, and like get cheaper versus like, spend more now, have it for a long period of time. It's like one of those classic, behavioral economics examples. So if you can get past that hurdle, it is better to stretch your budget to the quality pieces while you're doing all the effort now.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that for me on my side, architecturally, I think that goes a lot with as well, like the structure. And I know to a certain degree, like you have to have the structure for building safety, but there are things, even, certain details or just even materials, exterior materials, siding, things like that, that end up, or whether you go with wood stairs or concrete stairs outside and things like that, that end up really, I think you're right. It's an investment. You're investing in your property. And yeah, it's, short-term pain with the, with the cost, but long-term gain with what you end up having. And one of the things I was wondering too is, so I'll specify certain materials, insulation, for example. And I know since we both are in California, California has its own codes and restrictions. Do you ever see yourself finding a material or checking with manufacturers, especially on certain finishes, maybe on the exterior or even certain wall finishes? I know I work in Laguna Beach where they're very specific on certain wall like structures, what are all the finishes because it's a high fire zone. Do you ever find yourself looking for that in manufacturers as well, since I know you're in the LA area?
Specifically to like natural disaster criteria. What I find, I've been on the hunt for contractors that specialize in, eco-friendly building.
Mm,
And I've had a few conversations now, quite a few conversations that have said like, hey, I called my business like eco green construction, when I started 10, 15 years ago, because there was the demand, but not necessarily the rule, like the laws. And they've all said
mm,
California has fairly strict laws now.
mhm.
And so basically everything is compliant and eco-friendly. Like, that's just the level standard of building now. And I love that. But I also want, I feel like there could be more to do. Like, especially for residential, right? Like residential buildings, like no one's going to be certifying their house as like a lead project unless they're like in the industry for some reason.
Hmm.
But I feel like we should still be attaining like the next level of eco-friendliness, whether again that's sustainability or toxicity levels, because there's always more. Like California set like a very basic kind of like level of like human rights kind of
Hmm.
as it is in terms of exposure to certain things or circularity, things like that. But I feel like there's more that we could do. So that's kind of like always been a disappointing answer I've heard. In terms of natural disasters, things like the flammability issue is one that comes to mind, where
Hmm.
things like used to have to be covered in fire retardant until more recently when that law was stepped back. And now the populace is demanding things don't be covered in fire retardant because it has such a horrible impact on human health.
Hmm.
So that is like the one area where things are a little bit at odds, but at the same time, fibers like wool, for instance, if you're going to be doing floor wall to wall carpeting, even though that's not popular anymore, but whatever, say if you are, or it's just an area
Yes.
rug, wool is actually more naturally fire retardant than polyester.
Hmm.
So things like that are complementary. But on the other hand, like I said, the appeal for, removing those kinds of chemicals is still like a win in my opinion. But I guess in general, I don't typically think I'm designing to a worst case scenario. So it's really
Hmm.
good for people to pair up with people like you who are.
Yes, thank you, thank you. It's just like I said, I work in like Laguna Beach, coastal town. They're very specific assemblies. That's the word I was looking for. Wall
Oh,
assemblies is the assembly of the wall, and they do include even interiors, especially. And I know commercial too. That's a big thing. I remember working on a commercial project, and the fire marshal came in, and we put on this like acoustic ceiling in this dining
mm,
hall on a project I was working on at a previous firm, and he's like, I need all of the specifications from the manufacturer and like, is it even allowed in California? And we had like already installed part of it. And we're just like, oh my gosh. And he goes, yeah, I need to know what the like fire rating is on it and everything. And thankfully it was okay. It took a lot of convincing from the manufacturer to send us specific information. So that was really interesting because it was like he needed like certain specific things. This was really interesting working with this fire marshal. He was very by the book. And so that's why I was wondering, that's how I've experienced working with certain materials and finishes is getting pushback from like the local jurisdiction, like the fire marshal, for example, being like, yeah, I need to know what you're designing and what is the rating on it. So that's where that question came from.
it's interesting. A lot of the projects I've done, I definitely hope to do more in my own home state because I don't want to travel anymore. But a lot of the projects where I'm specifying finishes I've done has actually been out of state.
Mm.
And as far as I could tell, nobody
Oh,
cared about
yeah.
anything. And they were also smaller projects. So it wasn't necessarily like a government building or like a school or anything like that. They were just, smaller scale commercial projects, places like North Carolina and Texas. So it's also crazy, working from state to state because it's like a patchwork of rules and things.
Oh, I can only imagine working in different states. I know that's really interesting. I know even as an architect, being licensed in different states requires different things. California definitely is the hardest state, I think, in the US for any sort of licensure or any sort of certification or qualification. So I definitely feel like it's there at the top. And then one of the things I also want to talk to you about is your design process. Where do you get inspiration from? Because I really enjoy your designs. I was just looking through your website again before this call, and you have just these beautiful spaces that you've created. So, where do you get your designs from? Like, can you share with us a little bit your design process?
Also a very complicated answer because I don't always know where it comes from.
Mm.
The typical answers you might expect to hear is, social platforms, right? Like I
Mhm.
do love my Pinterest. I do love looking at, Insta hashtags in the industry. I do also look and watch design shows like everyone else, which is really fun. So it all kind of like immerses in there. Also seeing people's work in real life at various like retail or hospitality venues, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel or a spa or whatever. So getting into those real life places because that's the magic I'm selling, right? Like the
Mhm.
transformation, the feeling, especially when working with other businesses, I feel very passionately. I feel like it's such a shame when any shop, office, retail, hospitality, anything like does not invest in a designer or, really tries to DIY or cut on the budget on the design because it's money left on the table.
Mm.
It is such a big piece of nonverbal communication and the client experience, whether you're having a tax accountant and you have a client come into your office, or you have a pop-up store and you're asking people to like come in and buy clothes and stuff. Like, it has such a big impact on the client interface and then the success of store after. I just feel really passionate about like helping other businesses, through that element of work. And that's the beauty of going into those places in real life, like the impact that it does have. And then I think that's it. Like, just exploring the environment around you. So, and also this space itself kind of has to talk to me a little bit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm considering when I walk into a space, like the functionality of it or the lifestyle of the particular person or people in there and the architecture itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always like excited. I might Google ideas, like if the space has a really tall ceiling or if it has like a really crazy window or something. I might Google ideas like specific to that architectural element. And then that might have one cool like piece that I like, and it kind of snowballs into other ideas.
So I have a lot of listeners who are architects. And so you as an interior designer, I want to ask you, what is it like your experience working with architects?
It's been really easy.
Really?
I've never, yeah, I've never had a problem. Usually, like, we're on the same side. And, sometimes there might be like more of a bump in the road with a builder or an engineer or something like that. But I feel like designers and architects are like kind of on the same page in terms of, pushing the project to the overall like goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to work with them more. There's been a lot. So the majority of my projects are furnishings projects and less new builds. But in the experiences I have had, it's been pretty easy peasy. Sometimes, it's just a couple questions back and forth, but I've never really had a problem that's like they wanted one thing and I wanted the other thing. It's like, once in a while, there's a potential that if I'm like, doing a question about a floor plan or suggesting something, there's a potential I don't know that they have a problem with it because they haven't
Right.
told it to me. So I guess that could be happening, but it's always been very, very minimal.
Good. I'm happy to hear. I'm happy to hear. And one of the things I also want to talk about with you today is just you're an entrepreneur having a business and what that's been like for you. And one of the questions I was wondering is, how, especially, it's kind of interesting right now in the industry. Like, I feel like everybody's really busy, but then there are ebbs and flows in the industry. And so when you have kind of those down periods, how do you approach those?
By crying. No, I'm joking.
No, that's honest. That's honest. It is. I totally get it. I'm only a year in and I had a little dip around the holidays and I was like, okay, what do I do with this time? Because no clients are signing up projects right before Christmas. Nobody wants to do, meetings. Everyone's kind of just like doing Christmas parties, things like that. Nobody's worrying unless you're in the midst of construction. The clients will usually be like, let's get to it at the beginning of next year. So, but how do you approach those periods in time?
I don't know. I just kind of came out of one. So my baby is a year and a half, my now a toddler. So when I went into maternity leave at the very end of my pregnancy, I had maternity leave and then I kind of came back, and it was as, the real estate market was drying up because of interest rates, inflation, things abroad. So I was kind of like, what do I do? Like, I kind of like came back with a vengeance and like ready to work, very clear on certain things. And it was very crushing. It was really like upsetting that things were so slow. I think if those things hadn't happened like in tangent, the timing was just a little bit off. So that was very like shocking. And I kind of started thinking about, are there other ways? So I guess what always happens is I start thinking about, are there other directions I want to take it? Is there another service I want to offer? Is there a pivot I want to make? Do I want to close it down? Do I want to work for someone else? I've been doing it for a long time now. Part of that time is the side hustle, part of it as my only hustle. And I've experienced so many ups and downs, and it has, the truth is my personal story, it's not been like a smooth sailing or like shot on a rocket ship into the stars. It's definitely been a grind. It's been a lot of work. So I guess it just kind of comes down to like, prioritizing what's going to move things ahead, working on my marketing chops, getting really clear about the avenues of that part of the business. If you don't want to be a bookkeeper and a marketer and a business development professional, and you just want to be a designer or an architect, then you have to go work for someone in a
Mm-hmm.
firm. But being a small business owner, a startup, or whatever, you are wearing all of those hats. So you do have to learn a lot of that to a certain degree. Some of it's been really fun. Some of it's been a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And, those kind of changed for me over the years, what I think is fun, what I think is not. So yeah, I still think about that all the time. And the answer is, I don't know. Sometimes it's really tough. And I think until there is a tipping point,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be resilient, and you kind of just have to persevere and think strategically and go forth if that's really what you want to do.
That's great advice, because I was going to ask, like, what would your advice be for someone who's thinking about starting their own interior design firm? And I think you really highlighted a lot of the resiliency. It's the wearing multiple hats. There's a lot that goes into having your own company. It's, yes, you get to be a designer, maybe 50% of the time, and 50% is the other that people don't think about, because when you work for someone else, you don't have to worry about that. You just show up and you design, and you do the architecture, or you do the engineering, and there's so much behind the scenes that takes place that it's definitely been a lot.
Absolutely. And my biggest piece of advice is, I worked for someone else before I started out. Well, that's not true. Not before, in the middle. So I had started doing the side projects 2014, 2015, but then in summer of 2018, I started working for someone else as well as an assistant. And she was so I would say work for someone else, but a small company.
Mm.
Someone who's a few years ahead of you, who you're going to see what it's really like as you start and as you move into the middle, potentially take on someone of your own. Because that it did teach me a lot about design, but it mostly taught me about business, what to do, what not to do, everything from like how she behaved to
Mm-hmm.
how she ran or didn't run systems, to how, like expectations that the client's gonna have of you in their house, like so many different things that was really helpful. I only worked for her for a few months, but you learn the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I feel like even if you're really like young and can get away with it, you have some other like means of support. Even if you have to work for someone for free, it's an internship or whatever, that is like way more valuable than, I feel like, a whole degree in the design field, specifically for people who want to run their own businesses or work for themselves, because you will not get taught that in class.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. I think a lot of what I've learned in architecture has come from just showing up at work every day, working for someone else. The business side has been a little bit of learning what to do and what not to do from previous bosses. And then I think one of the biggest things is, once you're in it, that's when you have your biggest learning curve, because you got to
Oh,
figure it
yeah.
out.
You got to figure it out. That's the thing. Like, it's almost like a cherry on top if you are so skilled in whatever it is you're doing: design, architecture, landscape design, whatever, furniture design. It's great if you're really skilled, but it's almost even better if you're just like a good figure it out person, a good problem
Mhm.
solver, a good, like, someone who can just like make things happen. Because that is mostly the thing you're going to need to rely on until, again, you reach that tipping point and you can bring in other people or whatever.
No, absolutely. Well, Erica, thank you so much for sharing about your business and about your design process and just everything. This has been really informative for me, and I know listeners will really resonate with it. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun and easy. So thank you so much for
Good,
making
good.
it that way.
Of course. And where can listeners find you?
I think find me over at Google, Eco Method Interiors website, the Instagram handle. It's all the same.
Perfect. I'll provide links in the show notes. Erica, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. As we conclude, I want to express my gratitude for joining me in today's episode. I hope you have found it insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and click that like button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share this with your friends. You can follow me on Instagram at From the Honeycomb Podcast, and you can also further your support of From the Honeycomb by visiting the Patreon link provided in the show notes. Your contribution helps make more episodes possible. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, A Spark of Positive Energy, that comes out on the 7th of each month. Thank you so much, and see you next Friday.